Welcome to another episode of Destination Linux Podcast.
Welcome to episode 72. I'm Rocco, and with me this week is our full team, Ryan, Zeb, and Michael, and we are super excited to get to talk to Chris Lamb. Chris, thank you for taking the time, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I've been a listener for about 3 or 4 months. Really like what you're doing. I love the vibe you've got going. So yeah, cool.
So you're a listener and you still decided to come on. All right. So you are the Debian Project lead. You are a director at opensource.org. Correct me if I get anything wrong here. You are a freelance programmer. You're active in the Reproducible Builds organization. You're a contributor to hundreds of open source projects we'll get into later, but your list goes on and on. All right, so before we get started talking about Debian directly, let's focus on you and what you've done. So you mentioned on your website about being a film enthusiast. So give us your top 3 favorite movies of all time.
Ooh, thing is, you want to go really art house and say, oh, I really like all of these like really fancy films, but I think sometimes I was like, what do I continue to rewatch? And sometimes that's a bit more instructive. So one film I've watched like countless times is Fifth Element.
Oh,
yep.
Nice.
I mean, it's not like highbrow film, but it's just I could just totally watch that.
Multipass.
Yeah, indeed, multipass. I've got a really soft spot for the original Stargate film.
Yep.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and also classics like Hackers and stuff like that. Perhaps one I keep watching that's slightly more highbrow is Man for All Seasons. Of the is it Robert Bolt or Thomas Bolt, the play? It's pretty good. But yeah, I was just thinking. Yeah, try not to. When everyone asks you like, "Oh, what's your favorite film?" You just want to say something about something that won the Oscars or something that won.
Yeah.
Well, don't worry, we won't be giving any highbrow choices here.
Yeah.
I don't even know what movies win Oscars ever. So,
Ryan, what is your top 3 movies of all time?
Look, I mean, Star Trek Undiscovered Country. I'm a big Trekkie. You can see all the Star Trek stuff behind in that case there. So Undiscovered Country, I think, is one of the most underrated Star Trek movies. The Matrix, of course, and Pulp Fiction. Yeah. Not The Matrix 1, 2, and 3, by the way. Just the original.
Right.
Oh, they made others? I didn't know.
Exactly. What about you, Rocco?
I would have to say Gladiator is my favorite movie of all time.
Ooh, that's not bad.
Rocky IV was up there, and Saving Private Ryan. So yeah, I could watch those all day long.
Yeah, I think I've watched Rocky IV about 20 times.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Zeb?
Well, mine is almost some of the popular votes, but I don't think the last one will be. So my first, and I just watch it forever, is The Shawshank Redemption. There's just something about that I really enjoy. And then a bit of blood and guts, like Rocco. I love Gladiator. It's a fantastic movie.
It is.
And then everybody hated 2, 3, and 4. But for me, First Blood, the original Rambo, is also up there as one of my all-time favourite films.
Is that the one where he's in the valley?
Yes, he gets caught and taken back to the sheriff's office, and then he disappears into the woodlands. Mm-hmm.
Michael?
So I agree with Shawshank Redemption with Zeb as one of my top ones, but I don't know which is my favorite. The other 2 would be Jurassic Park and Terminator 2.
Good ones.
All good choices.
Yep. So you're also a cellist, and you've performed in some public concerts at points.
Sure.
So when did you start? We keep learning that every project lead and dev and all these have these ridiculous talents, and that's certainly a ridiculously cool talent. So how did you learn to start playing?
It was certainly part of my family. I think I started the cello. I started playing cello when I was 4. I was absolutely tiny, playing on this incredibly tiny cello, and I've just carried on playing since then. in terms of concerts, not as many as I used to, but sort of in and around London, things like that. Yeah, it's really good. And it's really good to actually, what's more enjoyable than concerts is just sort of going around to people's houses and playing music all day and then just going home, you know?
Yeah.
For lunch. Yeah. It's like, it's really sociable. You know, you're not, no pressure and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
So
nice.
do you have any photos of when you were 4 playing the little tiny cello that we can put into this to a screen cap or something?
Yes.
That sounded like you didn't really want us to put them in there.
Yeah.
That's all right.
It's okay. I've actually got one that's a little bit funny, so maybe I will send you that over if you like.
It'd be perfect. And if you don't worry, because we can, if you want us to kind of mix it up, Michael is a professional recorder player. He plays the recorder
Yes. I can also play the harmonica.
and the cymbals.
I mean, I can't make it do any particular sound, but I can play it and something comes out. So works out. So the most typical, the most obvious question we have to ask is, how did you get started with Linux?
Ooh, with Linux. So I think my first introduction to Linux was through a family friend who kept sort of throwing out old hardware and things like that. So these were machines that were already about 5 years old and things like that, and he was just about to just throw them away. But family friend was like, oh, you know, maybe Chris would like them, because he liked computers at school. So I got a very old machine. I think it was must have been a 286 or something. And that had sort of DOS on it and things like that. But in the next few years, he was also throwing away other stuff. And I ended up with a particular book called, I think it's called Running Your Own Internet Site with Linux. Had a version of Slackware in a CD sleeve in the back. Which was, I guess I managed to get that installed and things like that. But in those days, internet site didn't necessarily mean a website, because that's what you presumably inferred from site. Like having a HTTP daemon, as they like obsessively called it, was like number 7 of 9 of the different things you'd want to run after an FTP server, a Gopher server, a Time server, all these kind of bizarre things. So this is when like an internet site was like more of a sort of MISC shell server going on there. Anyway, that was Slackware. And then I eventually decided to, I got perhaps a bit slightly faster computer and decided to read some magazines maybe and read about this sort of Red Hat thing, and everything's like Red Hat. So I sent off from a firm in the UK called the Linux Emporium. And what they did was download the ISOs, when 600 megabytes was just huge. And then they would just burn them to CD and send them to you, for just a small charge. And I was like, oh, brilliant, because I just didn't have internet and no way was that going to happen on dial-up anyway. So I sort of saved up my £10 or whatever it was and sent off for Red Hat. And it came back on like 6 discs. Oh, this is so good. Oh, yeah. I went to install it, and the installer was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, you need 12 megabytes of RAM," and I only had sort of 8 or something like that. I was like, "Oh, this sucks." I've just spent £5 on this Red Hat set of discs. Yeah, but actually, luckily, what really happened was when I bought these discs, Linux Emporium would throw in very old discs as well, just for fun. Mm-hmm. Ones that even to them were super old, and one of them was a very old version of Debian. So it wasn't even this current stable version of Debian. It was something like Potato or something, just equally. I don't even know what order that is in. Anyway, I installed. I put that in and was like, well, this is older maybe, so it didn't need 12 megabytes of RAM.
So was that your first experience with Debian? Is that like what sparked the fire?
Not necessarily sparked the fire, because I think I then tried a whole bunch of others over the years. And one that springs to mind was something called Apparel Linux, which came free on another CD. I'm not really sure what that was.
It's amazing how well the CD marketing worked. We hear a lot of people talking about getting into Linux because of those CDs being in magazines.
I mean, how else were you going to get it? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe on the early ADSLs you could have downloaded an ISO, but
Cool. So, Chris, you've been a Debian developer now since 2008, I believe, and you're currently serving as the project lead. But going back to your developer days, tell us about some of your favorite contributions that you've made to Debian.
The thing is, I've had made quite a number of quite a few small changes everywhere. In terms of like any standout ones, they're more ones that have sort of intrigued me or scratched a particular itch, or have just been kind of fun. So, for example, I think I made a very early IRC bot that spammed a channel with all the uploads, all the open bugs. And this is before everyone kind of did that. And I found that really just useful, and like it was really great to see like what's going on in the project sort of live in a sense. Also, other silly things like a package I made, I think last year, called Installation Birthday, and you install it, and it does nothing until it's the anniversary on which you first installed your system. So if you install your system on 1st of September, nothing happens till the 1st of September. Then you get an email saying, "Happy birthday! Your system is now."
That's cool.
With all
Nice.
ASCII art birthday cake. So yeah, just silly things like that. I guess recently I've been doing a lot of quality assurance work. We have a tool called Lintian, which is a package checker. So developers will sort of build a package locally, and before uploading it, and run it against Lintian, and it basically checks for hundreds and hundreds of common, or at least common checks and problems with packages and things like that. So it says like, this is not installable with this, or this build depends on this and it shouldn't. It's installing this to the wrong directory. It's got wrong permissions and all these kind of things. And basically this, it's a good way of ensuring that the quality of the Debian archive is quite high, because if you add it to the Lintian, then developers who perhaps may not know like the latest idea of may not have the latest update on a particular policy and things like that, it'll just say, oh yeah, in Python we're now changing to this because it's better for these reasons, and Lintian will tell you that. So I've been doing a lot of Lintian hacking. So I wouldn't say proud, I mean that's probably the wrong word, but just that's certainly what I've been into recently.
What I find so intriguing about this is, when you think of people like yourself and project leads and devs, it almost seems like you guys were born into making this incredible software. But like Rocco and I, we're starting to play with little things in bash scripts and installers and little tweaks to code and things like that. And while it feels like you've got this huge imposter syndrome when you interview people like you, but it's neat to hear that everybody kind of starts out with that tweaking and just little things, and then it builds and builds and builds into bigger projects. And I think that's important for people to hear, because a lot of people want to get involved in Linux, but they assume that you have to be this expert coder who has 15 years of experience, when the reality is some of these bugs are just a single line of code that you recognize and can fix, or something out of place, and boom, you've just helped that distro out.
Absolutely, yeah.
In some cases, like for me, when I first got started, it was just because I saw a project that I wanted to use and it looked bad. So I sent them some like icons, improvements and stuff like that. They were like, "Oh, you want to help work on it?" I was like, sure, I guess. And it was just, then it just became a bunch of other stuff accidentally.
So I'm not the only one that worries about pixels?
Well, no.
Okay.
This is also like 2008, so everything was terrible. but it was more like, I didn't want to be like the rude, like, hey, this could be fixed completely. Here's how to do it right, or something like that. It was just like these icons were like, some of them were broken, or some of them were just missing and stuff like that. So I just fixed those, and then all of a sudden I became part of the project. And it just kind of like that kind of thing happens, that you just want to fix something small to you that they look at it as a big improvement or something like that too. So it's an easy thing to do, is just like see anything that you might want to improve, and just ask them if they would be interested in you doing it. And 99% of the time it's yes. And also, please, yes, please.
And for those interested, if you want to see Michael's first work, just download Hannah Montana Linux, and you can see his contributions.
That was my second. Thank you.
You've come a long way, Michael.
Right.
I mean, people say, how do I contribute to Linux? It's like, well, just find something about your system that really annoys you and just fix it,
Exactly.
Sort of like, I must find an issue or I must find this new feature. But that kind of thing's that's a bit, rough edges, not necessarily like literally broken, but, as you say, like icons and things like that, you can always find something that's in your wheelhouse.
Yep.
So that's actually a good transition to something that's not necessarily broken, but a fantastic improvement, and the Reproducible Builds organization. So you're heavily involved in the organization, but could you tell our audience about like what are Reproducible Builds, and tell us a little bit more about the organization?
Oh, well, I mean, Reproducible Builds. So I guess the background is that whilst you can download the source code for any piece of free software by definition, and you can analyze it for security vulnerabilities, ones, accidental ones, or you can analyze it for malicious code that's been added. Whilst you can do that for the source code, everyone pretty much installs binaries, like they're just doing apt install blah, they're doing zip install, whatever, from stores and things like that. And so we don't really have we don't have a real promise that those binaries actually correspond with that source. You have no idea that someone's not added in an extra bit of source, a bit of source code before compiling it, or the compiler could be compromised and things like that. And this is a big problem because, as I say, you could just go on GitHub and see the source code for Nginx. But if the binary that you install doesn't correspond to that source code, you are basically running untrusted code. Is this really fulfilling the sort of original promise of free software in a sense that you have real control over your system? So this is a problem in that, because people are using binaries, it means that build farms, sort of compilation farms and that become targets for malicious actors. So if I compromise the Debian build servers, I could basically rootkit thousands and thousands of machines all in one go. Like that sounds pretty good. And if you looked at the source code, it looked absolutely fine. But as I'm sneaking something in at the last minute, the binaries, so there's no corresponding thing between the two. It also means that developers themselves become targets. So if you were producing ISO images for something, you might publish all the source code. But if some malicious actor turned up to your door and said, hey, can you just add this extra bit of code in before you release it? That'd be pretty great. Nice house you've got here, that kind of thing. Or they just simply compromise your personal laptop to add backdoors and things like that. This means that like individual developers are targets for attack and things like that because of this inability to validate that binaries that you're running on your system correspond to the original source code. And reproducible builds are solve this by first promising that every time you build a piece of software, you get the exact same source. So if I build a piece of software, you build a piece of software, we get the exact same files at the end, bit for bit, identical results. After you made the build do that, what you do is you just ask everyone to do that, and you come to a consensus over what the correct results should be for this compilation. And from that, you can work out whether either everyone's been compromised, so everyone's machine has been rootkitted to add these extra stuff into the binaries, or if someone sticks out, if someone's binary sticks out as being different, then it will, you can sort of flag and be like, oh, I wonder why this person's different and things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But how does a normal user, is it something behind the scenes always, or is it something a user could use to validate, or is it just a behind the scenes platform?
It's mostly a behind the scenes platform, in that it's just another sort of security guarantee. Mm-hmm. To say, almost like a seal of approval. You might see, it's another way of just leveling up the security of the whole infrastructure as a whole. Mm-hmm. Users themselves, of course, could reproduce any particular build they want, but I don't particularly envisage, the average user wanting to recompile LibreOffice to check whether they could sort of somewhat trust that if there's been a sort of consensus that the correct LibreOffice is the one that they're installing, then they're fine. Yeah.
Well, it's always good to have those checks in place because in the world we live in, you need those. Mm-hmm. But you're also involved in several other open source related projects. So what have been your favorite to work on? And by the way, I'm going to show a screenshot of your projects page, and it just scrolls and scrolls and scrolls. But what's been some of your favorite to work on in general, even outside of Debian?
Oh, well, I mean, the first thing to say is, those have been accumulated over the years, and not all of them are, shall I say, up to date. But one community I've really liked to work with is the Django community. And not only because the code base for Django is really good, but I just love how their approach to stability in terms of versions and things like that has really sort of spoken to my sort of software engineering principles, philosophy, things like that. Really on the same wavelength. Code quality is very high, great emphasis on code reuse and things like that. So a lot of the projects on that page that I think you're showing are Django sort of extensions in a sense. But I've also worked on Django itself. Again, it's just been really fast interacting with them. They've been very happy to receive patches and things like that. So it's a great friendly community. So if anyone's into Python and looking for broken things, they want to line out the edges, then Django is certainly a community I'll push people towards.
I mean, that's one of the languages I'm trying to learn now, Python, because it just seems like such a language that's more and more useful as you go, that a lot of projects are adopting, and that you can do neat things with, whether it be on the web, which I think is the Django version, right? Where you can do things with Python on the web, or even in, applets and that type of stuff that you're running. So what convinced you to go from, we kind of talked about your history with Linux and things, but what convinced you to go from a contributor to a project lead for Debian?
I'm not entirely sure, really. I mean, I just thought I would, certainly many previous project leaders that I really respected. And so, sort of 10 years ago, getting into Debian, I'd say, that person's a project leader, yeah. Of course they are. I mean, yeah, it's really a well-respected role. And I never really thought about ever running myself. I guess I just thought that I could probably bring something else to the table, or just basically give back to Debian in some way, because I've sort of learned so much from it. I also thought that by being part of the leader, that could be an even bigger contribution in that sense, yeah. And also maybe I used to work for quite a few years in the London startup scene, and I thought maybe there were some things that could be, not everything in there is great to steal, but I've certainly sort of stolen ideas from Debian and free software and brought them to companies I was working for there. So yeah, I thought maybe there'd be some way of giving back in that sense, if that makes any sense.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So you're not only the project lead, but you were reelected for the project lead, which recently in April. So that says something. So congratulations on being reelected. Mm-hmm. So what is involved in the election process itself? And, what are your primary job duties as the project lead?
So the election process takes probably around 6 weeks. What happens is that there's first a call for nominations, and you nominate yourself saying, I'd like to stand, and then you submit a platform, and then there's a discussion period of about 3 or 4 weeks where people ask you questions about your particular platform. The platform is probably 1,000, 2,000 words of, this is what I tend to do, this is how I think I could improve on the previous years, stuff you intend to do in terms of goals, perhaps what you're not going to do, and things like that. What you see the future vision for the project is, things like that. And after that, there's a voting period where people just submit votes using via email actually, and at the end the winner is announced. So it's a web-based one based on discussions revolving around a mailing list mostly.
So how many virtual yard signs did you have to put out?
Well, the platform is the main one, but yeah, responding sort of coherently on the vote discussion mailing list is obviously required as well. And having
Well, you mentioned in your re-election blog post that being the project lead is difficult. What convinced you to stay as the lead try to become be re-elected for it?
Well, one thing I thought was quite difficult is it takes quite a while to get going. So, I mean, I felt that after sort of 8 months into my term, I was thinking, I haven't really, I've done a bunch of stuff, but I'd like to really get to the whole, sort of the meaty things, perhaps, and certainly some of the things that I referred to in my original platform. And I just thought that, I could really have a proper run at this if I just have if I would, be very graciously, given another term. And so that was primarily the reason, in terms of just the ramp up speed being quite significantly longer than I thought. So that was one reason I decided to rerun for this year. Also, after speaking to quite a few friends, and they said, this is clearly, that position clearly needs a fair amount of getting up to speed and things like that. And there's quite a lot of things going on behind the scenes that are quite draining. So you can't be always pushing on the headline and publicity generating initiatives. Sometimes you just have to reply to all those private emails sent to you and things like that.
So what are some of the difficult parts of the job that people don't see that you have to do? Or maybe it's not even just difficult, just those parts of the job that take up some time that people don't realize you have to do as a project lead.
Well, speaking to the latter ones, the time intensive ones might be perhaps all things to do with sort of finances. The Debian project leader is sort of the arbiter on, someone wants to go to this conference or run this particular event, things like that. They're the arbiter on whether that's a sensible decision to spend Debian funds on. So sort of liaising with that and certainly takes some time and lots of emails back and forth. In terms of the difficulty, it's a very mature project and a very huge project. And as part of that comes with a few personality conflicts, and we're certainly worldwide. So we get quite a few cultural differences, should put it that way. And so some of them need ironing out, and not all of those sort of discussions would be suitable to have in public, sort of mediation style, between two teams, or like working out whether someone's disappeared or and things like that. Or just plans that are in progress. If someone's, if a sponsor is thinking of pulling out, it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to discuss that immediately on a public mailing list. Stuff is sort of occluded from the rest of the community, and you're sort of battling things in your inbox and can't really tell anyone what's going on. So that can be a little bit.
Yeah. If you have an issue in the future where you can't, provide the public information about that kind of thing, feel free to send us an email and we'll take care of it for you.
Sure, no problem. Yeah. It's not as if anyone got into free software for the fame in the first place, but you just you spend 2 hours on an email and everyone's like, what have you done today? Nothing.
Well, that brings me to my question: is what does a typical day of Chris Lamb look like? Is it making out emails for Debian? Is it packaging projects? Is it all of the above?
Pretty much all of the above. I'll sort of wake up and do a bunch of hacking. I reply to emails, see what's come in, more emails come in whilst you're doing that, things like that. Try and stay on top of the inbox of the leader at Debian.org inbox, because that can run away with itself very easily, and you get behind and you start to lose emails and things like that. Also, a big part of it is following up on people who have not responded they're very big. Obviously, everyone's very busy. Everyone's got lots of calls in their time. So, I mean, doing quite a few follow-ups. I'm like, oh, hey, just wondering how far you got on this, just checking up on the status of this, or wondering whether you had any further thoughts on why, and things like that. So yeah, that's probably my sort of day-to-day leader responsibilities.
Cool. So you've been with Debian, as you say, probably since around 2008. How has Debian's approach or ethos changed over the years from when you started?
Oh, good question. So I would say in general, it hasn't changed that much. I would say the general principles of, free software, and particularly the particular style of the community hasn't changed. I mean, there's certainly been some angles that have changed, but perhaps those are also reflected in the wider community as well. So, more, I guess it would be fair to say, emphasis or more consideration towards trying to include more diverse groups of people. And that's certainly not unique to Debian, but I think it would be fair to say that Debian is one of the slightly more progressive ones in that sense. And we had a code of conduct many years ago. We've had diversity bursaries for projects. The Debian Women's sub-project has been active for a decade, maybe more, and things like that. So, and we're a big member of Google Summer of Code, and the Outreach project as well. So yeah, I mean, that's certainly one angle that's changed. But the general ethos is pretty much how it was before. Mm-hmm. I think which is actually part of the charm of Debian, in the sense that it's not really subject to fashion. Let's put it that way. Which in some senses is something a bit of a shame, because he's sometimes slightly behind on certain things, certain technologies. So, I'm not going to say behind, because that adds a sort of moral component to it, but, or at least a judgmental one. Things like Flatpak and Snap, I think it would be fair to say we aren't leading the way in terms of Snappy and Flatpak adoption, in Debian anyway. But that's sort of part of the charm of it, that because all of those things could disappear tomorrow and things like that. So it's just sort of slow and steady adopting what has been sort of proven to work and things like that. So it's like, okay, good, we're now on this, great. Which, as I say, part of the charm, because it makes it very reliable, particularly for companies that just sort of want to, or people who just want to get stuff done with their computer. They're not really bothered about the means in which they get a particular piece of software, but they just want to make sure it works, and they want to make sure it works tomorrow, and they want to make sure it works tomorrow exactly the same way. And they've just got other stuff to do,
Is there anything within that approach you're wanting to change that you haven't had a chance yet, or the team wants to change? We talk about the stability and all of that, and that's the charming part of it. But is there some things within it that you guys want to change?
A lot of the things I'm immediately thinking of are parts of the infrastructure, not necessarily user-facing things. Although user-facing things, I'd certainly love to push for. I can't think of a better word right now, but a slightly more sexy website, for example. Mm-hmm. Particularly one that might be attuned to a new user. I mean, one handicap that Debian has is we sort of have this sort of curse of knowledge, in a sense that, on our homepage, we'll put quite technical details about, architectures and things like that, which is great. It's all correct. But someone who's new to Debian, that's not necessarily where their head is at. So we often fail to have empathy for these new users and to sort of learn.
I think it's amazing how in touch you are with that, because I'm one of the newest users of Linux on this channel. I've only been in Linux for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And when I go to the Debian page, it's great. The information's there. But you're right. It lacks that kind of, hey, welcome, come to me. The information's there, but it's just text, right? It's text and a logo, and that's it, which is fine. Ultimately, the information's there, but some of these sites and things for distros definitely have that feeling like, ooh, I'm downloading something that's latest, cutting edge. That's, and gives you that feel. And Debian, when you go to that page, doesn't necessarily give you that feeling right away. But you guys are in touch with that. You see it, and I assume it will be something you guys work on in the future, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's always something we've got our eye on. But this general idea of sort of empathy is sort of runs throughout Linux as well. I mean, for example, including examples on manual pages is quite rare. We'll add all these options and we'll be very specific. And you're right, we'll have all the information, but are we really communicating? I'm not sure. Are we successfully communicating what a new user wants to learn?
Well, my experience with a lot of the Debian developers and users who are like in the core like fandom, I guess, is they would, when I first tried to convince them that the website needs an update, a lot of them would come back with saying, no, it's perfect. It gives you all the knowledge that's available in Debian and stuff like that. And then so then I asked them a question and so how do you find this particular thing? And then they go through this 20-minute process to get to it. I was like, well, that's the problem. And so the website is full of information, but you have to know how to get to that information for it to be utilized by so someone who's never spent that much time into the intricacies or the technical stuff, they would be probably pretty lost in it. So I'm excited to hear that there's some kind of effort going to be put into the Debian website, because not to be rude, but it needs it. So
it's such an important
Can you
project.
tell Michael is into website design?
Yeah, I mean, that's what he does for a living.
I'm a web designer, so yeah, it's
No, I understand. And if you already know the information, then and you know where to find it, well then, great. Website isn't for you. That information isn't for you. I mean,
right.
Yeah. I mean, this is not an easy task because the website is in tens of languages. It's absolutely vast in terms of the information that it has, and some of it's split between that and the wiki and things like that. So this isn't sort of a facelift. I mean, you can't just slap a theme on this and it solves the problem. This is otherwise that'd be pretty easy. You just put a bunch of JavaScript, everyone loves that, and then everything will be happy. But it's more of a restructuring from what do they call it? Information architecture, I believe is the technical term, point of view.
So as a project lead, do you find that now you get more or less feedback from the community, from the website and things like that? Are more people reaching out to you than ever, or is there kind of a filtering of information? Because a lot of us are also managers or leaders in our various, jobs, real life jobs outside of the podcast. And sometimes there's that filter that happens, towards the leaders and things where you're not getting as much information from people.
Oh, absolutely not. I've been almost overwhelmed with the feedback and things like that. I think, and I would love probably to get more. Every month I post my sort of bits from the Debian Project leader to the developer mailing list saying this is what I've been up to, and always solicit feedback and comments and things like that. And often I'll get many emails from not necessarily developers, but people on the periphery saying, oh yeah, what about this in Debian, things like that. So it's often just things on my radar and things like that. So have you thought about integrating with this? I've never even heard of those two technologies. And things like that. It's really good, yeah. So definitely get more feedback.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so that's really good. None of it's ever hidden. And also get more feedback from various teams within Debian. So we're a very flat hierarchy. So there might be, if you were drawing it, you might put the project leader on the top, but it's very, very flat. And so the teams might come to you saying, oh, we're having this sort of problem, or we don't seem to have enough sort of hours in the day. Have you had any ideas about this? Or we're having problems interacting with this other team. Can you help out with that? So I'm certainly getting more feedback along those lines as well.
Brilliant.
About the project, actually.
So speaking of the project differences for like new users and stuff like that, when they're trying to learn the different intricacies of Debian, there are 4 release types. I mean, technically, I don't know if the experimentals would be considered a release branch, but stable, testing, unstable, and experimental are the current, like the release branches, I suppose. Stable provides like the obvious, what the name implies is the stable release, and then you have testing and unstable. Would it be possible, if a user wanted to get the latest applications, do you think it'd be possible for them to install Debian and use the unstable packages without worrying about like if it's going to mess up the whole OS? Because we've seen mixed opinions on that particular topic.
Oh, I've got very strong opinions on this. So this is probably the worst named thing in Debian. So you said, you have the stable distribution, and as the name implies, I think I'm quoting you. So yes, the stable distribution is very stable in the sense of it's like a rock. You can build pretty much anything on it. It's got security support for a gazillion years now. Brilliant, great.
That's a long time.
It is quite a long time. Yeah. Well, up to we joke that it's got security support up to 2038, because then all your 32-bit timestamps are there. So yeah, it's got that you'd build you'd build servers and stuff on that. You're right, but the stable and unstable really refer to the version numbers, not necessarily the stability of the software. So I mean, in stable, the version numbers stay the same. Well, because they have to. Because if we were giving you new upstream versions of everything every week or whatever in your server, that wouldn't actually be very, very good. You want it you want to install it once, and 2 years later, oh look, it's doing the exact same thing. Brilliant. Moving on.
Right.
Great. So unstable, whilst it's actually it's probably the biggest misconception in Debian, in that unstable is too unstable to run. But as it refers to the version numbers, it just means that it's got the latest and greatest software. It often can be, particularly what you're after, it can be less buggy than the stable version, because if you fixed a particular, as in the stable release of Debian has a particular version of something, and the new upstream comes along and fixes your particular niggle that you've contributed upstream, perhaps, then unstable will be more stable than stable in the sense. In the sense that your machine isn't restarting, it isn't breaking all the time. There is a bit of a meme that if you run unstable, it will break every week, and you won't get but that's just not my.
So why not change the name? Why not just change it from unstable? Because that's got to be confusing to
just
a lot of people.
So unfortunately, no, not really. I mean, the first biggest problem, as a bit of a joke, what would you rename it to? So just deciding, just to get everyone agreed on what would
stable-ish
be a mammoth task.
Yeah, you're
I
right.
would say
it would be a big test to get everybody agreeing.
I mean, I think you should just change. I agree with the statement about the stability versus the word stable, because in development and programming, the word stable has absolutely nothing to do with stability as far as releases. And I've actually advocated for a lot of projects to just use the word static, because that's really what it's implying. And it doesn't have any kind of if you said freeze, like a feature freeze or something, that also sounds something like it could potentially be negative to some people. Whereas static, they're just they might not understand what it means, and then just look up, try to look it up, figure it out. But whereas stable, they already have a misconception based on the word itself. So, as far as stable goes, I would want that to be changed to static. And as far as the unstable, momentum.
So there you have it. We here have solved your problem.
Solved.
Yeah. Destination Linux strikes again.
I'll just commit that now. Yeah. Done.
Perfect.
All right. Cheers. Next.
That was my intent for asking that. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Credit.
All right. So I take it that it is safe to assume that you would recommend Debian over other distros to Linux users. So what are some of the key benefits of Debian over other options out there, in your opinion?
One is the basically super stable for servers and things like that. Or for any installation, you just want to install it and basically not care about it for years or things like that. So I've installed Debian on many systems of family members and things like that, and they're still running, and I've had to do no maintenance on them at all because they aren't having to upgrade every 6 months or things like that. Another key benefit would be that it's not very opinionated, which is sort of good and it's quite conservative also, so it won't jump on the latest technologies immediately, or just wait and see and then be like, okay, this seems to be where the entire ecosystem is going. We'll get on that and things like that. And it's also not really subject to any sort of leader's whims. So as project leader, I can't just go in and say, oh, we're now moving to KDE as the default. It just doesn't really work like that. And this is a bit of a double-edged sword, as I referred to earlier, in that it's not necessarily the latest and greatest philosophies and ideas and software. But it does mean that if, say, you've built a business or you've just built your life around the operating system, it's not going to change underneath you at any time. So, like, the desktop environment isn't, just pick a random example out of the air. Say even you've invested considerable sums in, say, training staff or family members to use a particular desktop environment, should we say. And then suddenly the next release will just have a completely different one. Well, that's great. It might be objectively better. But that sort of, huge investment you've made in training is now essentially wasted. And that makes people quite nervous in a sense. And rightfully so. It's also extremely lightweight. So you have, also, and very, very versatile. So you have, all sorts of bizarre projects, like I say bizarre, really useful projects like Raspbian based on Debian.
And love that project, by the way.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. That runs in my car, by the way. My car runs Raspbian. And so it only engages, though, for safety when the car's in park, but the screen turns on, it runs Raspbian through a Raspberry Pi, the interface is through an HDMI. And it's just amazing how light and flexible it is. And so there are a lot of great projects that stem from it being light, just like you said, and it's amazing. And it's so stable.
Yeah, and it's sort of a bit of a toolbox to make your own sort of distribution. I mean, you have ones like Kali Linux, the sort of security, sort of cracker-based angle and things like that. So yeah, it's sort of here are some ingredients to sort of make a system out of what you want. Yeah, rather than coming to you with this is our firm user-focused philosophy and things like that. So yeah, good and bad things about that.
Yeah, but if at any point you'd like to do, like, advocate for Play to ePlasma as the default, I will support that platform.
Surprise.
I think that would be easier than checking the name of unstable, but it would still be
a hard sell.
Interesting discussion. A hard sell, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the interesting differentiators on your FAQ page is that you offer email support, and that you state that a lot of messages are often replied to within 15 minutes. So how do you manage that sort of level of support? I mean, I think every company in the world would be crying if they could get, a 15-minute response time from their IT suppliers. So how do you manage that? Is it just your developers are so passionate and want to get problems solved, or is that you as a project lead saying, look, we've got to get on top of this. We've said we're going to do it. We've got to get it right.
It's certainly more of the former. It's certainly more organic process. So in terms of email support, there's a Debian-user mailing list, and that's got lots of users, lots of developers, Debian developers, and sort of all sorts of people in between, if you see what I mean. And it's basically just a community run thing. There isn't sort of an end point that there's no support at Debian.org, and then you get like a ticket back, and then we're like, we're working on your support ticket. It's much more of a community-based support effort, and so that's one way we.
So you open source the community, so anybody, it's not just you or the devs, but anybody who's a part of that community and knows the answer could respond to your email. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant.
But also, it's not just who knows the answer. And someone, I'm having this problem installing this, and you're like, well, I don't know the answer, but I've got 5 minutes, and it's kind of intriguing. So I'll just hunt around, and now I've learned something. You've learned something. The community it's now publicly archived on the mailing list, with probably some quite good search engine juice. So you'll help other people. So, it's certainly a community organic thing. It's not a top down. Target metric based approach.
Nice.
And of course, there's much more synchronous support channels. So, for example, #Debian IRC channel is very active and things like that. So,
very good.
Yeah.
Well, on top of the support, you guys also have an incredible library of software, 51,000 plus different pieces of free software. I tried to install every single one before this. No, I'm teasing. So currently Debian uses the Synaptic Package Manager, which when, we're talking about the flair and the fancy, and I can't believe I'm going to ask this question because one of the things I hate the most about most distros is their package manager. But is there any plans for Debian to add a GUI-based package manager like Software Store or some of the others out there, or are you guys going to stick with Synaptic?
Well, can I ask why you think we use Synaptic? I mean, Synaptic is a graphical user interface package manager. Are you perhaps thinking of another one, or?
No, I mean, that was when I installed it. That was what was there pre-installed was Synaptic, but
He's referring to more of a store, like a app store type approach.
Yeah, kind of like, where they got the icons and it shows the picture of the various software, blah, blah, blah.
Screenshots.
People are doing the more fancy looking software.
All right, the GNOME. So, well, that'll certainly be the next release because I believe that's now in GNOME default, right? The GNOME.
Yes, GNOME provides it as a default aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll certainly be part of the next distribution. So all of these package managers are basically on top of apt, the underlying package manager that does sort of the system level things. So you can kind of choose your poison in a sense. If you just want to interact directly with apt, that's fine. If you want to use GNOME software, a bit more, I want this, that sounds fun. That's got a good icon. Bam, install that. Great. Mm-hmm. And then there's all sorts of things in between, like the Synaptic one, a slightly old-fashioned user interface. Let's put it that way. And then there's things like Aptitude, a terminal-based one, things like that. So there's sort of countless ways to interact with the underlying apt package manager. So we don't really, I wouldn't say that Debian uses Synaptic in that sense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, it's one of those new user things. So when I first got into Linux and you look at a terminal, that thing looks like, I don't know, space code. I know for us now looking at it, it's like, well, it's so simple and I can search for the apps I want. I can install stuff. But when you're brand new to Linux, it looks completely like it's from outer space. And you generally just go online and you search for how to do stuff and you copy and paste it. So a lot of new people, like when I've trained new folks in Linux, they get you very used to at first always using those software stores because that's kind of their safety net. They don't want to touch the terminal at first. Eventually they get to the terminal because you almost eventually have to as you start tweaking and using the power of Linux. And that's why it's kind of one of those first experience things where depending on the desktop environment you chose, and I think XFCE was the one I chose with the Debian install. So likely why I didn't see the GNOME installer and saw the Synaptic there as an option. But, it's one of those first experience things that I was wondering if you guys were looking into. But it makes sense. I mean, you can install any of the GUIs on top of it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the first experience, I think, is key and really important to ensure that people, essentially stay with Debian or are impressed by it. And it's probably best seen as a whole, all the way from first hearing about Debian, like what do they hear about it? Then going to the website, their downloading experience, they're getting onto a USB stick or whatever. All of those things need to work and be quite seamless. and including the sort of first boot experience. If it, you
Yeah.
just hit a terminal, it's like, well, great, thanks. And you're right. Some of the some of them are not as user friendly on the first boot as they should be, and perhaps have slightly suboptimal defaults and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Debian is somewhat loath to change upstream defaults and fiddle too much with the first. We'd rather be quite a sort of purist in a sense, and say, oh, this is pure GNOME and things like that. So that often has some that obviously has some positives in that it's just like, this is the real GNOME experience. We aren't messing around with it. Some of the sort of the slightly rough edges, the slight integration things, particularly for new users, aren't there. And it's often easy to sort of wave them away and say, well, this is fine. It's just a terminal. What are you talking about? Because we, again, need to put ourselves into the mindset of a developer new to, or sorry, a user new to Debian.
Yeah, I think that the it's an interesting issue that Debian has to deal with, because there's like the whole vanilla aspect of the DEs. So is like the defaults chosen by Debian, or just the DE like developers? Did it just use the vanilla structure? So in a sense of like, if the DE is making the decisions, maybe those app stores wouldn't be an option in some cases.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's certainly a fair amount of inertia to change any default from Upstream's point of view. So to diverge from Upstream, that's usually considered something that starts, should we diverge from Upstream on this? Well, it starts with 100 negative points. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems like it should be, changed if you need to, sure. But there should be a pretty good reason, not just because I like it, things like that.
Interesting.
In terms of theming and things like that, that's slightly orthogonal. What we're talking about is slightly different to that. So, of course, we'll have a new theme for every sort of beautiful artwork every release, and some great work by the artwork teams. But we generally will err on the side of just giving you the vanilla desktop environment experience, which will vary between the two, between all the desktop environments we provide. So yeah. Which also splits the work, which splits the hours, which means that each one gets slightly less time than we would love. But hey, that's life, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
So there's 51,000 pieces of software in the repositories. There's also new formats coming out for Snap Flatpaks to add even more packages that don't necessarily have to be packaged in the repository. Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of discussion going on in Debian about including the ability to support those formats? And if so, is there any kind of like preference of which one would be more likely to become like supported first?
I see. So Snap and Flatpak as application distribution sort of methods, techniques, technologies, they aren't really Debian's number one priority in a sense. Right. They're not really something. We certainly like to have everything within Debian to be within Debian proper, rather than installed via these other mechanisms. And there's a number of reasons. I mean, one reason is because the philosophy behind Debian is very much aligned with free software, and often if you're installing random bits of software from elsewhere, it may not actually be free. It could be proprietary software, and that's not necessarily something that Debian developers want to spend their time on. If you see what I mean, helping other people install proprietary software. It's like, people might want it, but I'm just going to work on something else.
Right.
Because, why not? It's their own time. And things like that. So yeah, it isn't, we don't have a, grand strategy, and it isn't really on people's radar, the whole Snap and Flatpak angle at the moment. But maybe that'll change. It seems like it's a certain direction in which various bits of software are going in, particularly some quite core components like browsers and things like that. And so how should we say it? Some accommodation with these newfangled doohickeys might be needed, but Right now, it's not really that high on the list.
You've just explained why it's not high on the list, but is anything that to do with the sort of concerns that are surrounding the security of it? Because you've probably recently seen what's happened to Snaps, and they found some malware in it. Do you think this is a bit of a storm in a teacup, or should we be concerned that there's more options to get that malware in things like Snaps and Flatpaks?
Well, there's certainly cause for concern that it's sort of easier to get malware in. I mean, there's sort of a double-edged sword in that these Snap and Flatpak offer some sort of containerization. So with they are in some senses more secure versus running typical binaries and stuff. There's a bit of irony there, but that notwithstanding, whilst it's a bit of a storm in a teacup, I guess one promise that sort of Debian and sort of Linux distributions in general have made over the years, and it's now kind of implicit that stuff you install can be trusted. And if that kind of goes away, that's really not to the...
Yeah, in that case, you'd be trusting the mechanism rather than the packages themselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So I mean, great other ways of getting malware into your system. Yeah, and then this age-old, millennia-old trade-offs between convenience and security. And
how does the Debian project? How do they feel about the non-free repo that's available? That's more of a necessity thing?
It's certainly on a necessity. It's there's a big debate within Debian ongoing for many years that whether it's part of Debian or not. So I mean, depending on your point of view, it's not part of Debian. We don't say it's deliberately off to one side, saying don't use it. It's not turned on by default. You have to enable it, and here be dragons. People aren't adding packages to that without good reason, and they need to justify why something does go into the non-free section. So yeah, I mean, the ideal goal, the platonic ideal, would be that the number of packages there just goes down to zero as we get free drivers, free firmware for everything, and things like that. So yeah, the other problem is that sometimes you need your Wi-Fi to work. So we do need to make this sort of firmware available in some ways, but it's
reluctant necessity. It's really
reluctant necessity, and I would, and the more it can just go away and die, it'll be great.
All right, so let's switch gears and talk about the installer for Debian. So this is one thing. Well, one thing I love about the installer for Debian is that it flew through all of my partitions. So unlike other installers, and I'm looking at Ubiquity right now, just sits there and hangs and hangs and hangs on my hard drives that I have in the computer. But the installer flew right through it, and you pretty much can customize it to your individual needs. I mean, it's got so many options for everything from the partitions down to the users and everything. But it does introduce not a problem, but it introduces more screens for newer users, like whether to have a separate root password, where some installers will combine that. It has a couple of screens. If you do want to manually partition to go through it, you have to go in and out of a few screens. So it's not complex by any means. But is there any plans on consolidating some of the things and go the route of Ubiquity where it's more user-friendly?
So, I mean, just to explain why there's many screens and things like that, particularly when you have things split between multiple screens. One massive benefit of Debian installer that's perhaps not obvious to most users is that it's entirely scriptable. Using a mechanism called pre-seeding. So this means that you can have quite complicated scripts to deploy, thousands of Debian machines and install them using the installer in using a sort of recipe and things like that. And you can fine tune everything from, you can use percentages based on the disk you want installed and things like that. So yes, this sort of the ability to automate the installation later, or the just ability to automate it, should I say, is one of the reasons why it has some of this, why it makes trade-offs in terms of user interface and user friendliness. To speak to future improvements, there's always things that are being sort of changed around to make them a little more easier to use, or people users will say, "Oh, I did this wrong," and maybe the wording can be better and things like that. There's those kind of changes, but there's also I think I've seen some work over the past week in making the live installation images installable using Calamares, the cross-distribution installer.
Nice.
And that might be one avenue. It does sort of, again, split the work between the Debian installer proper and this Calamares-based approach. But I can see one working for one type of user and one working for the other. And that is the Debian ethos in it.
That'd be very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about that, what is the type of user that Debian's going after? Are you guys interested? When we're talking about even in the installer, there's a lot of network related questions and things in there that you may not see, say, in a typical Ubuntu installation, where they may be more geared towards a desktop user. Are you guys more geared towards a system administrator style server, or are you guys going after everyone from a user standpoint?
I would say we're going after everyone in the sense that we're pretty agnostic over who we go for. And because that immediately makes trade-offs in terms of some user experience and first run sort of viewpoints, it invariably will attract and be more appealing to, say, someone on the system administration side of it, rather than someone who's never used a computer before. And I think that's just, it more follows that way around rather than we are targeting sysadmins and things like that. Sysadmins find us and use us. But yeah, it's more that like, let's just kind of make let's just provide the tools for people to sort of make their own computer in that sense. And not get in the way,
Do you think that's a misconception about Debian, that it's not for new people? Do you hear that ever, or is that not something you get feedback on at all?
Well, I hear that fairly often. Sometimes I agree with it, sometimes I don't. I would certainly agree with some of the things you've raised before, like the sort of package managers and first run experience, particularly your first experience of the Debian installer. It's asking you about
host names or whatever.
Host or domain name for your network. And things like that. Yeah, sure. But I think it's difficult to be everything to everyone.
It is.
If you want to be a generic tool for you to sort of build your own computer networks and systems, etc. on.
Nice.
So that you're more and more about the foundational aspect of Debian. Debian is like always been, and to me is known as like the foundation of other projects and stuff like that. So you're saying like because of this this approach that the idea of it being a foundation is pretty spot on then. Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way of putting it. And it's hard to sell that. We're a foundation. Okay.
Build us. Yeah.
Who wants that? Yeah.
So during that installation process, you do get the choice to install a variety of desktops. So when you do a reinstall, what desktop do you choose more often than not?
Well, to reinstall, I'm not sure I've... with Debian, you get really quite aged and ancient installations. After releasing the installation birthday package I mentioned, people were reporting 10 years. It wasn't rare at all.
Wow.
Oh my.
Yeah, I mean, because you just don't need to, whilst that particular install may have moved between many different laptops because they've been dropped or drinks spilled on them, etc. Pubs and barbecues.
So what I think he's saying is he's not a distro hopper. I think that's what
I was
he's
going to
saying.
say, yeah,
I'm not even a distro reinstaller. I mean, but no, I mean, I tend to, what I have for many years used the awesome window manager, a tiling window manager.
Nice.
So whilst I generally tend to use sort of GNOME applications-ish on top of that. Like I will go for I'll use GIMP over the KDE ones, or I'll use Shotwell over the KDE equivalent. But that's just a bit of a legacy. So I think I first installed GNOME and things like that. So, but basically I'm a sort of tiling window manager person, and now can't.
Have you tried i3? Have you tried i3 yet?
No, I haven't. Just sell me on it.
Listen, there are awesome window manager users. There are open box window manager users, and then there are the i3 window manager users. It will change your life. That's as good of a sales pitch as I can do. But
really, dude?
No, awesome actually is fantastic. So I can't really sell it over that, but i3 is one. If you like playing with Windows managers, I think you'll enjoy a lot, mainly because there are so many amazing configurations out there that people have already done that you can incorporate and play with to make it do some really unique stuff. So it's a lot of fun to play with. It's not any better. That was a joke.
What he's trying to say is that awesome is an interface, but i3 is an interface cubed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there you go. How's that sales pitch, Chris? Are you going to download it right now?
That's pretty good. I'm sold.
So do you have any user data or perception on which desktop environments most people use when they install?
Most people use will choose the default one, which is GNOME.
Interesting.
Has been for a few years. There are, but if you go around a Debian conference, most people, if they're running one of the, the top 4 desktop environments, they're probably running GNOME too. But actually, at the developer conferences, a lot of people are running tiling window managers and all sorts of bizarre setups. So.
Did you hear that, Rocco?
Right. Mm-hmm. Whatever.
Rocco's not a fan of tiling managers, only because I use one. That's why.
Is that why? That may be the only reason why. No, just all right. So you can pretty much, we've established you can pretty much install any desktop environment you want in Debian. And we know from talking to Martin Wimpress that he does some of the packaging and maintaining for the Mate desktop environment. So do all of the desktop environments, all of the projects, do they take care of the package and the maintaining of it? Or is that something that you guys work on as well?
It's a mixture. So there's, as I mentioned before, Debian works on a sort of team basis. So we'll have the GNOME team within Debian, the KDE team within Debian, the Mate team, etc. And the interaction between there and the upstream desktop environment varies between the environment itself. So, for example, I think the LXDE developers are now working almost, I wouldn't want to say exclusively, but they're working on Debian directly in a sense, like pushing packages into Debian and then letting them filter down into the derivatives. I believe that's the case with LXDE. Whilst with GNOME, it's a bit more at a distance. So GNOME will release a new version and then the GNOME team will jump on that and package it and ensure it's in Debian and things like that. So the relationship is different between all of these environments. And obviously there's a lot of crossover between GNOME developers and members of the Debian GNOME team and things like that. And again, that will vary between the environments.
Right.
Is there like a percentage consensus, consensus? Like how often is it that the DEs participate in that? Like how often does in the percentage of like different teams, how, like for example, Martin's a part of the Mate team as well as the Mate Debian team. Like how often does that overlap happen?
Oh, I wouldn't be able to say. I think there's often the core contributors are in that sense because they're just more involved in both communities.
Okay.
But I can't, I'm not sure I can give you any numbers on that, unfortunately.
I understand. I was just more of like just curious kind of thing. So but it's more of a fun topic. There's a new, the new release of Debian will be Buster. And I'm just curious, what are your favorite things that will be coming in Buster for the people who like to use on the stable release?
The big thing is, I'm really looking forward to the new versions of the latest version of GNOME and things like that. I think they've really done a whole bunch of cool stuff in the past year since the last recent Debian stable release, and so I can't wait for that to hit the stable distribution, because then, well, I can upgrade all my family's machines to it.
Ryan, did you hear that?
So,
Yeah, I
he's
hear
a
it.
GNOME user,
GNOME fan.
and he's a GNOME fan. See,
right, yeah, but also the same for sort of KDE Plasma and things like that. That'll be in the next stable. That'll be in Buster. But yeah, it's pretty much sort of more of the same. Just like everything updated, the same promises that being very stable in the normal sense of that word. So pretty much like more of the same in terms of great. Everything's ticking along, brilliant, great.
Nice. I could tell Chris is a fan of this show. You know why? Because he's hit on everyone's favorite. He's been kind to everyone's favorite window managers, GNOME, KDE, XFCE. Right there. Bam. You're good. You're real good, sir. You appease us all. So there are a lot of different distros based on Debian, and Ubuntu is, of course, a major one out there. And I was just curious, how does the collaboration work? How are you guys collaborating with all of these different entities that use you guys as a foundation?
Well, most of the time, a lot of the development work that is sort of done, intended for one of these downstream distributions, should we say, is done directly in Debian. So a lot of the core, very low-level toolchain stuff, for example, new GCC versions, new versions of libc, new Python versions, things like that. That work is done directly in Debian, even by, say, Ubuntu employees, because that's just a sensible and, well, sort of good way of, sort of community blah, oriented way of doing it. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of the time it's just the work is being done directly there, and it's just become so much easier for that to filter down, and there's no impedance mismatch between the two and things like that. So I think that's probably why the LXD developers are pushing a lot of stuff into Debian directly. A lot of it just happens directly, so nice. There doesn't necessarily need to be any outreach from Debian to the downstreams, because they're already just sort of coming over to our house and fixing it up. Gotcha. And then after a short delay, their house is also fixed up magically. So
that's brilliant. I love it.
Well, Debian is used everywhere and by a ton of different companies and organizations. Ryan, you had showed us an article about the International Space Station.
Yeah, how cool is that, man?
So this was obviously back in 2013 that they switched to Debian, but it's still something that should be mentioned. So I was looking further into that, and there's an article about them testing out a Linux computer for future missions to Mars, and that came out in 2017. So they're building on this, and they have their own SecureOS Linux which is a Debian-based specialized Linux for them. So all of this being said, there's a lot of people that use Debian, but in the installer, you have an option for the popularity contest. So what I'm looking for is there's a lack of verifiable user data in the Linux world in general. So how valuable is this information to you and to distro developers to have information of who uses it and when?
So it's sort of valuable, but also this is really at odds with the whole idea of privacy. So there should be absolutely no question that Debian should be calling home and revealing who you are and things like that. And we'll always err on the side of doing that. In terms of popularity contest itself, it's pretty, it's certainly opt-in, but it's also pretty coarse in what it tells you. Like, it'll just say, I've got these particular packages installed, which is kind of interesting for making sort of broad assumptions about what kind of people are using Debian for. But the opt-in rate is quite low, which is absolutely fine. I wouldn't necessarily want to see it any higher, in the sense of it's really awkward to ask for people to sort of like leak their privacy in a sense. So it's certainly not erring on the side of that. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is in the installer that it is by default, you are opted out. You have to actually check the button to opt in. So I just wanted to say that, Michael. Just saying.
And I just wanted to say he also said the opt-in percentage is very low. So there you go.
So there's this ongoing battle, Chris, as you can tell, of what some of the things that other distros are deciding for opt-in by default and things like that goes back and forth. Because on one aspect, it's really neat to learn things like, for instance, the International Space Station is using Debian. It would be really neat to know that, 50% of your users use a certain desktop environment, so that
KD Plasma, naturally,
or a window manager. But and a lot of times, a lot of these distros are doing very benign data. They're not, collecting IP addresses and all this stuff. They just want to know, here's some software you have on, here's the desktop you chose, blah, blah, blah. So, but there's this constant battle, it seems, within the community of people saying, is this an evil thing? Is this going the way of Microsoft? There's this fear of it.
I think that's right. And there's obviously the privacy concerns that you've just raised, etc. But also, and it is neat to learn these things, but from Debian's point of view, it's not necessarily that actionable. So, for example, if you learn that 50% of people were actually using Cinnamon desktop, let's say, and that's quite neat to learn because that's unexpected. Would that mean that you would immediately jump from being a GNOME team member to a Cinnamon team member? I'm not sure. You just carry on doing what you were enjoying doing before. It isn't there isn't like a top-down metrics-driven approach or even a top-down anything, really. It's like, go work on this. I don't want to. Okay. So often learning about these things isn't that.
Yeah.
And it certainly would be neat, like having that something. I'm learning about the International Space Station, stuff like that, or Google's internal operating system, as in ones used on desktops and stuff. That's based on Debian and things like that. And it is kind of cool. And I think I was in the latest at the latest developer conference, and someone said, "Oh yeah, I rolled out 50,000 Debian machines to big coffee chains." In-house music system.
Wow.
Like, oh, when was that? Oh, like 2 years ago. So, oh, right. So I've been going to that coffee chain and I've been basically listening to Debian and not even knowing about it. And that's kind of a bit sad because I didn't know about it, but also just, because I didn't need to. Like, great. That's, I think, part of the charm. You can just use it. Not tell anyone. It doesn't matter. Great.
I like it.
Mm-hmm. So on the popularity side of things, there are a number of Debian-based distros that have been sort of like rising up the charts and people have been taking notice of them. We've firmly established that you don't distro hop. But do you...
We're working on him, Zeb.
We're working on him, yeah. Do you run up the occasional virtual machine just to have a look at what these Debian-based distros are doing and to sort of think, oh, that's actually quite good. We'll nick that and we'll incorporate it in the main Debian. Is that the sort of research that you do, or do you have other people who might do that sort of thing?
It's certainly something I leave to other people. I haven't really tasked anyone for doing that specifically. But no, I've just only got a finite number of hours in the day. So, we have enough different desktop environments within Debian itself. And I sometimes think I don't use some of the rarer ones enough as it is. So to jump to other distributions is a bit of a stretch for my time, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm certain there are things that would be immediately stealable. And
well, open source, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah,
somebody
borrowing
that idea. So yeah, we'll take that little snippet and we'll plug it into here, and that's just improved that side of it. Yeah.
There are some really fantastic work that people are doing with these Debian distros that I think are just the theming, the integrations they do are just incredible. So definitely take a look at some of them out there at MX.
Yes, I will. Definitely. I'll check that one out. If you plug it enough times. Good to know, yeah. Yeah, I really should. And the ones I do check out a fair amount are things like Tails and things like that. Or, Kali Linux and things like that. But that's often to use them for their utility rather than just as a sightseeing mission. See what I mean?
Gotcha.
Right.
Or a stealing mission, sorry.
Stealing machine. There's a great book, Steal Like an Artist. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's good. Yeah.
So Debian utilizes a lot of kernels, including the Linux kernel, of course, which we're all familiar with, the BSD kernel, and is working on support for the GNU Herd kernel. This is really interesting to me as a new user because I don't know all these kernels and things that are out there and being supported. I hear about them, but I was wondering how much of is Debian engaged in that? Is that just something that's happening around you guys, these other kernels and their use of Debian, or is that something you guys are actually engaging in?
Well, just to give a not necessarily correction, but the usage of those non-Linux kernels is incredibly small. It's like a niche hobby group of a niche hobby group. So
Gotcha.
no one's really running GNU Herd on their system. It's not like it certainly won't be an installer option. Like, oh, which of these 3 kernels do you want? It's not that at all. There are perhaps exception might be using the FreeBSD kernel with Debian that has a particular cache in that you can use ZFS perhaps or the PF tables firewall, which is great because if you have a large, say you're running a data center, most of your machines can be Debian, but the firewall machines you might want to use. So you may want to use pfSense. But then if you do that, do you want to really run, 2 machines running FreeBSD in terms of, that makes your, architecture, those machines will then stick out and they'll always, they won't work with your automation immediately. So those, being able to use Debian with say the FreeBSD kernel means that your user land, you can, SSH in, use bash, and it is just Debian, but underneath you've got, pfSense and things like that. So it's extremely niche, and it's certainly not something that will be sort of even mainstream within Debian.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's sort of Linux all the way in a sense. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of news lately that a lot of distributions were going to be dropping the 32-bit support from their next release. Is this something that Debian is looking to do, or will you be giving all those old machines a lease of life for a few years yet? Oh,
Definitely giving them a lease of life for a few years yet. We have no plans to drop the i386 architecture for Buster, and I'm not even sure it would be sensible to drop it for the release after that either.
Would it be still? Would the meme be possibly to be accurate of 2038?
I think it may be dropped before then, but yeah. But yeah. Unfortunately, even i386 is, as the architecture name is misleading because I think it needs a 686 processor, due to some recompile making assumptions that you need at least a Pentium or something like that. Yeah.
Another interesting thing we talked about earlier about how Debian is used is everywhere. Google announced that Chrome OS is going to be using Linux apps inside of the Chromebooks as a virtual machine type of thing, and it's called Crostini. But They also announced that Crostini is actually powered by Debian. So, what are your thoughts on this particular approach? And is there any involvement for the Debian project to be involved in this kind of this development? And if not, is there any interest in the project to do so?
There's certainly no official involvement or collaboration. If there are contributions coming back to us, that's brilliant. And it's obviously great to hear Debian being used in yet another environment.
Yeah.
I can't speak to Crostini and their virtual machine approach directly. I'm just not really that aware of it. But yeah, all and this is partly again part of the appeal of Debian. They can just use it as a toolbox, and brilliant. Yeah, this is working for us.
Well, this is so amazing from an aspect of the number one sold laptop out there is Chromebook. And so every school, at least here around where I'm at, requires the kids to have a Chromebook. And that's basically the learning platform that they're using, the operating system. One, because it's very inexpensive. You can get a Chromebook for $150, $200. So it's much more accessible than a lot of the other laptops. So the idea that now you're going to have these containerized Linux Debian morsels within the Chrome OS that kids are going to be exposed to early on really does, I think, create a huge potential for a lot more users in the future of Linux, a lot more people growing up with Linux, which, let's be honest, a lot of people utilize what they used in school, what they were taught on as their main platform. So I think it's a huge advantage for Linux here, being put into more of these Chromebooks. I'm
a little hesitant on jumping in as enthusiastic as you. I mean, yes, it certainly is Linux, but I mean, a lot of my family have Android phones, but are they really using Linux in the sense that you were implying? I mean, yeah, they are. They're running a Linux kernel and they're running a whole bunch of GPL software, but are they really using Linux? Are they experiencing the sort of some of the real benefits of free software in that sense? I mean, the privacy and things like that. I'm not necessarily
totally. I would argue no, and I agree with you 100%. I don't consider Android to be kind of a part of that, but I know what happens is, like, Crouton is what you would currently use to use Linux within a Chrome OS, and basically you're booting into Linux, and it's a big thing that people do with their Chromebooks so that they can get access to those applications. I think it's an exposure to open source software, whereas most people are going to use Microsoft Word, Adobe Premiere, all of these things that aren't available in those environments. Now they're going to be using things like Kdenlive, LibreOffice, all of these different.
Is that the project? I mean, you know far more about Crostini and their idea.
Crostini's intent is to allow the Chromebook users to use genuine Linux applications, but they're doing it in a virtualized machine that is like Debian powers their machine, but the apps are like the genuine things, and they're separated from the Chrome OS approach of like the web apps and stuff. So you can still, it's not really a Linux distro because you're limited in what it can do, but they're trying to add ability to use those applications.
I understand. Okay. Yeah. So, I'm a little less to worry about it. I mean, because if it's just another Google Play Store, then it's like quote unquote great that Debian is being used, but it's also not that great,
right,
philosophically and ethically, that it's being used to push, non-free software and things like that. It's like, well, that's fine, but yeah.
Right.
So speaking of Linux on a whole, if there was one magical thing that you could think of that would be a game changer for Linux to grow and dominate the desktop market, what would you say that would be?
Well, it's topics. Well, I think two things really. First thing, one topic we've touched on before, like basically being able to put ourselves in the mindset of new users and things like that, because we all have the curse of knowledge. I mean, even after a few months, you're already slightly au fait with a terminal, and so you just can't. And it's very difficult to even teach someone how to use it, because you're just like, oh, you just use sudo and blah blah blah. And it's sort of like, well, slow down, things like that. So I think that would require, that's a huge mind shift change, and that's really difficult to do. But also speaking to that, I think also changing perhaps changing the whole messaging of getting over. So once you're in the world, the whole idea of free software and open source and stuff like that, it's sort of a no-brainer, and like, yeah, of course, it has all these benefits and things like that. If you go to someone random on the street and, start talking free software at them, I mean, assuming they get the interpretation of the word free right, it doesn't really sell. It doesn't just really hit home. It doesn't hit any of their, of the things that really affect their lives. So, I mean, perhaps changing some of the messaging. I mean, for example, you could say, speak to sort of the privacy angle. I mean, that certainly is it's a bit of a meme in 2018. Speak to the privacy benefits of free software and open source, in terms of like, it respects your freedom, it respects your right to privacy, it doesn't share your data by default. It's just aligned in that way. It's it's sort of good people in that sense. And then I think if people come for those benefits, they will stay for the freedom. If I can use that
right
sort of cliche, yeah. And I think that kind of messaging change, because the technology is obviously sound. I mean, it already powers a whole bunch of powers everything basically, even a whole bunch of non-free platforms. But I think just getting people over would require sort of messaging and presentation sort of angle change.
Yeah, I have to agree, because I think communicating is probably one of the worst things that we as a community do. So I think that definitely should change.
Yeah.
So the next question can sometimes make our guests cringe a little bit, because it's like, oh my God, who do I pick? But who are some of the individuals in the community or that you work with that you think deserve some recognition? It's like the hidden heroes in the background that do all of this work and never get into the limelight. Have you got any people that spring to mind?
I mean, immediately quite a few spring to mind, particularly in Debian. I mean, we have a whole bunch of quite tireless administrative work being going on, particularly in the finance things. I don't necessarily want to name them, but they are basically pretty tireless in sending invoices and following up with missing payments and things like that from for servers and things like that. Our server administration team is a pretty thankless job in that sense, in that you also they only hear about things when things are broken, and usually by irate other developers saying, "Oh, why have you got my work?" So they obviously need sort of pep talks and recognition and things like that. Basically just the organizers who, they aren't doing it for fame and things like that. So also people who are organizing conferences, whilst there may be a head of the committee for this conference and someone who will open the conference. It's usually tens and tens and tens of people in the background, who've been toiling for months, trying to get sort of consensus on mailing lists and things like that. And that's those kind of people who I'd want to sort of bring to the front. But ironically, that's not why they were doing it in the first place. So they would actually probably hate that. That'd be the last thing they want. That would actually put them off. If they actually got fame and if they got the recognition they deserved, then they would actually not do it. But yeah, just a bit of an irony.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Wayland and Vulkan are some pretty hot topics these days. So what is your take on Wayland and its intent to replace X? Do you think it's going to be something like, fairly soon in terms of like the overall ecosystem, or is it going to be like what most people expect to be as more of a long-standing goal? Well,
it's odd because a few years ago I was thinking that we would sort of hub it by now. There'd be teething problems, etc. But actually, the sort of delay in it being mainstream has been a little bit surprising, particularly because how buggy X11 is, and also because of the terrible security angles of X11 and things like that. You would think that would certainly push promotion. So it's very interesting to see some distributions rolling back Wayland's decisions to go with Wayland and rolling that back. But yeah, I think it's another medium to long term thing that's going to happen. Yeah.
So is this another 2038?
I don't think it's a 2038. I think it might be a 2028. No, I suspect that. Yeah.
I think it's good that this is one of the areas where I think Debian, being kind of watching before it makes decisions is so important, because we don't think about the fact all the time that certain distributions who've rolled out Wayland just cut off 78% of their user base, because 78% of the GPUs sold are NVIDIA, and they don't work with Wayland very well at all. So that a lot of the reasons why I think a lot of them have rolled that back is because of that NVIDIA issue there. Now, whether that's NVIDIA's issue or somebody else's, who knows, but that's a big deal to cut off 78% of your potential user base.
It's brave. It's brave.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a very brave move. So are you a gamer, though, talking about Vulkan and all this stuff? Do you game at all?
Ooh, I game in the sense that, well, I had a pretty bad Tetris addiction when I was little, all that throughout university. So I'm not really a gamer in the sense of a 3D shooter, but actually, I remember this is when it was called No Metris, and now it's now Quadrupacel. I it might be a bit vain to say, but I was probably in the top 10 of the world.
Nice.
I have no real way of validating that, but if I wasn't, then I don't know. I got really good at that thing. And then I think I upgraded my graphics drivers to the Nouveau graphics drivers, the very early free software NVIDIA ones. And it broke my rendering, so I couldn't play No Metris, which was great for finishing university. But hey, yeah, it worked. Yeah, I'm not really a sort of 3D shoot 'em up. I mean, let's be, if I'm being honest, I've been to quite a few LAN parties where, I've played on Call of Duty and things like that. And, actually some of my most had quite enjoyable experiences playing Call of Duty, particularly the single player, modes. But I'm not a daily gamer at all. Only rarely will my muscle memory sneaks back and I find myself loading the Tetris clone.
Well, believe me, before this interview's over, Michael and Rocco will be trying to convince you to play Rocket League, just so you know.
I would never. It's the best game ever made.
It is. You should try it. And it works on Linux, so.
Oh, okay.
All right, so say Chris Lamb tomorrow is going on a trip on the International Space Station. You're getting a new laptop, and of course you install Debian. But what is the must-have software that you install first on a brand new install? Not that you ever reinstall, but if you were, just imagine.
Well, I suppose I get new virtual machines, etc. So, I mean, the first thing definitely is my own configuration and shell. I mean, I'm very much a man of habit and stuff like that. So I've got to install Z shell or Z shell, whatever, ZSH, whatever you want to call it. That certainly gets installed very first, and then Git, because that's where all my configuration lives. But after that, I would say I definitely install lots of other things. I mean, number 3, of course, is to install some backup software, and number 4 is to test my backup software. No,
good man.
I never do that.
But it's good to say, right?
It's good to say. It makes me sound very professional. Yeah.
So what do you use as a code editor?
I'm a Vim man. Things like that. It's got a not very highly customized, but a customized Vim configuration and things like that. So yeah, very much creature of habit. Don't fiddle with it very often because I'm just usually trying to get something else done. Fiddling with desktop environments or code editors and things like that is, yeah.
Ryan, the force is strong with this one, but we're going to work on him.
I know. So, we were talking about some of the controversy with Google and Android and some of that. I guess is a little bit of controversy of whether that's truly Linux and things like that. There has been this player that can be popularly hated within certain factions of the Linux community that may not realize how much they contribute to stuff, and that's Microsoft. So Microsoft recently announced the creation of their own Linux kernel for their Azure project. Many of the comments that I've seen are positive. Some of them are skeptical. What is your take on Microsoft's involvement and where this relationship between Linux and Microsoft is headed?
Well, obviously, if you look at history should tell us to be a little bit hesitant here. But in some senses, as long as they sort of play by the rules, it's kind of fine. So, I mean, so the GPL, the kernel's under the GPL, and so they must basically play by the same rules as everyone else. But if they're, again, like the Chrome OS thing, if they're just using Debian to build their own little walled garden of non-free stuff on top of it, well, that's certainly within their rights. That's certainly within the 4 freedoms. They can modify the software for any purpose, and that includes integrating with proprietary software on top, and that's sort of fine in a sense. Mm-hmm. But also, it's just sort of, well, that's a shame. I think society would be better off if that didn't happen. So whilst for sort of a moral argument, it's like that's a bit unideal, they can certainly sort of do what they like. Yeah, it's great to see so many named contributors from Microsoft contributing to Linux. I mean, I think in 1 month last year, they were the biggest line by line contributors to the Linux kernel.
Yeah,
sort of made everyone sort of sit up straight and be like, "Oh, that's
right." Wasn't expecting
wow.
that.
Yeah. I mean, it's in a way, it's kind of nice because it's kind of like Microsoft admitting that Linux is better than Windows. So.
And Michael, that's what they're saying. Every line of code they write is admission that.
Well, I'm
Linux
saying like the sense of like they had an announcement like a month ago or so that they were going to put Windows on a back burner, and they even fired the department head and moved people around in Microsoft. So if Windows is not going to be their main focus, and then they release something, they say their main focus is going to be IoT and server stuff, and then they release a Linux-based distribution basically for their IoT and server stuff. They're admitting that Linux is better.
Is that how that works?
That's how it works to me.
Michael's going to call up a CNN reporter and be like, "Look, here's your headline. I got this."
Like, Microsoft has given up.
Scroll back on that. I mean, again, if my IoT light bulb runs in Linux, it's like, well, that's cool, and I can sort of tell my mum that, but it's sort of, is it really running Linux in the sense that we kind of are using our computers and things like that? So I'm a little bit like, great, but is this really moving? I think the positives are not as big as we think.
Interesting.
So you're pretty much meh.
Yeah, pretty much. Although it's kind of cool, but it's kind of also, let's just take a step back. What does this really mean? Like, great, we're now making it easier and faster and less
So one of the things I noticed on your Debian page is that there's a list of hardware vendors that sell computers with Debian pre-installed. So is this a collaboration between you and those hardware vendors, or is it simply a list that people can send into to say, yep, we've got hardware and we install Debian on it? How does that work?
It's certainly much more towards just sort of being a list. There is typically no development agreement. There's usually no, I mean, certainly they would probably be contributing patches randomly, etc. But it isn't a sort of stamp of approval in that sense. We have had talks about having a hardware certification lab, which sort of goes the other way around, where vendors could potentially say, essentially, I make it up, apply for a sort of little badge. They can say, works with Debian, something like that. I can't think of the exact word. But yes, there is we would be slightly hesitant to bless any particular commercial enterprise with a sort of, you should buy this from a point of view. That's just not something that Debian can or should make a stand on. So even if we would like to do a bit more of a in-depth sort of integration, collaboration work, it sort of does have to remain at a sensible distance in that sense.
Yeah, but could there be any kind of like certified compatibility structure? Like if a company wanted to, have a guarantee with Debian that this will be compatible, would there be kind of like any kind of potential for that?
I mean, I wouldn't go as strong as to say a guarantee in a legal sense, but I mean, in some sort of a sort of certification lab where we say, yeah, we tried this particular hardware with this version of Debian, and independently it works. So yeah, go for it. And that would also speak to whether it required non-free firmware and things like that, or level of this works, but to get the Bluetooth you need this non-free component, or this to suspend you need this non-free component, and things like that. Are those kind of questions are very important for people choosing Debian and things like that.
Would love to see like a humble bundle structure with hardware manufacturers that are, there's a lot of them. They're starting to grow, starting to hear about a lot more, where part of some of the hardware you buy, like in Humble Bundle, some of that money would be donated, say, to your favorite FOSS project or distribution or that type of thing. That would be so cool to see. Obviously, Debian wouldn't do anything specifically with that, but that would be a really neat to see a hardware manufacturer kind of take that stance of some of this money is going to go to your favorite project.
Yeah, I also hope they do something that's like the Humble Bundle, and then I can choose $5 for a laptop.
Big spender.
Yeah, he is.
That's certainly not to say some of these vendors are already donating some of their donating to Debian directly, and some of them without making a big fanfare about it at all. One privilege of being on the private leader at email box is you do get to see the donations coming in, and some of the names they're private by default, but some of the names you see and the amounts are usually just sort of, oh wow, I can't believe that they like Debian that much every month.
Wow.
Nice.
Or they typoed when setting up the PayPal.
That extra zero was not intended.
All right, so the main theme that we get from Debian is it's stable. It's rock solid, and you want to keep it that way. But what is coming up in the future? Obviously, you have to look towards the future to plan things. So is there anything coming up that we may see in the near future that we don't know about?
Well, one thing particularly that's big news in Debian at the moment, perhaps slight behind the scenes, but the big thing is we've moved from a rather creaky development platform to GitLab. And the differences is made to development is probably far beyond what we thought. I mean, we knew it'd be better and it'd be a bit more stable and things like that. I would see a bit more collaboration and things like that. But it's actually probably 10 times what I thought it would be. Ben Hutchings from the kernel team was saying that prior to moving to this, they accepted one particular merge request via sort of email system and things like that. But since moving to GitLab, I can't remember the numbers, but they've orders of magnitude more. Same elsewhere, things like that. So that means the pace of development in Debian is massively picked up just from changing that tool.
Nice. I mean, there was also a lot of times where I would talk to some maintainers through the mailing list or through the bugs tracker that way on the email side that the experience between doing that and doing something like GitLab is so much more comfortable that I think that the impact is going to just increase in that as well as soon as people learn that that's available now.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you there were speaking to perhaps the slightly newer contributor, but even to, I mean, the people sending these sort of kernel patches aren't necessarily Linux newbies. So even for well-established developers, just getting rid of some of the speed bumps in getting a patch merged is already shown to be that great. It's been fantastic. So yeah. In terms of other stuff, I mean, more infrastructure stuff, like we want to move to something called source-only uploads. Again, sort of a slightly in the weeds technical thing. We probably want to include more security hardening by default. So last year we enabled Apparel by default, and I think increasing the amount of Apparel profiles, etc., to lock down applications, I think would be really good. One day we'll get rid of Python 2. One day, not next release, and probably not the release after, but it will be going. So yeah, lots of small architectural infrastructure changes that just make Debian that foundational core, that foundational toolbox that everyone is sort of relying upon. Things like that.
Well, we believe in supporting things that we enjoy using. So what is it that you guys have available to people that they can support you guys with, donations wise, time wise, anything? What can people do to help out Debian?
Well, the biggest thing they can do, and probably the easiest thing to do, is if you see something that you find a problem, please file a bug. That's a lot of the time I'll just hear about a problem with a distribution in person. It's like, oh yeah, I tried this thing, it didn't work. It's like, well, I think I know how to fix that. I just didn't know it was broken. So, I mean, that just takes a slight amount of time to write a bug report. So that's probably the easiest thing. So number one. And then number two, of course, is if you can fix those problems, or you know how to fix other things, or you can contribute in any other way, particularly documentation. Also, in terms of these newcomers to Debian are in this privileged position where they don't have the cursive knowledge. So they're the people in the best situation, with the best perspective to say, I didn't understand this thing in the installer, say, for example, or when I first booted up, I got this it wasn't broken, but it was just slightly weird. I didn't know exactly how to sort of get started and things like that. And that's incredibly valuable because once they start using it after a few months, they can't see that they'd had a problem in the first place because of this whole empathy for new users. So new users in particular should sort of contribute their experience about running Debian for the first time and things like that, and software in general.
It's interesting. Just quick follow up. I'm just curious about something. This is probably like one of the most important questions I could ask. The code names for Debian use Toy Story as the thing. So how does the process of the code name selection picked? And if you run out of code names for Toy Story, for example, like the characters or you've already gone through all of them, which Pixar film would be the next running to be the choices for code names?
Well, luckily, I think Pixar know that the Toy Story franchise has got a few more dollar signs attached to it. So we're likely to see Toy Story. What are we up to? 4, 5?
I think there's 3, but I think they're making a 4th one now. Yeah.
Well, there you go. We'll have another 20 characters, and all these things have merchandise. So they're very likely to throw as many characters in as possible.
Right.
Chosen by the release team. They basically can choose the name of the release. It's not something that's decided by the community. Luckily, otherwise we would never decide. Putting it kindly. So the release team will decide it a couple in advance. So the next release is Buster, of course, and then Bullseye will be the release after that, and then the release after that will be called Bookworm.
Nice.
And I think those must be in Toy Story 3 because I haven't.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, one of our patrons, Matthias, just wanted to say, Destination Linux, we are asking the hard and important question.
Hey, it's the questions everybody wants to know.
Everybody wants to know, exactly. Yeah. I was hoping we could try to get Ratatouille in there or something.
Yeah.
I think that might be vetoed based on the spelling. Can you imagine trying to type that?
Yeah, that's true.
Chris, it's been a awesome talk with you. I learned a lot about Debian because I'll be honest with you, I wasn't familiar with a lot of the Debian protocol and Debian itself. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And thanks for stopping by, man.
No problem. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Well, we also want to give a big shout out to our patrons who joined us for this interview. Thank you guys for your continued support of the show and keeping this happening, helping us get brilliant guests like this.
All right. A big thank you to each and every one of you, no matter if you hit the like button or not. All right. So everybody have a great week. And remember, the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Destination Linux podcast.
So, what's everyone been up to?
So,
working.
How's work going for you?
Michael, you looked pretty cool in that spot right there because the Debian logo was right over your eye and it looked like you had face paint on.
Oh,
like
nice.
Right around your eye. It was cool looking.
Like you were bravehearting the Debian logo.
I will.
Yeah. Well, the winging it's been fine for me because it's you that has to wing it.
Yeah, well, exactly.
So it's not been an issue for me per se. Mm-hmm. Just mutes my mic throughout the whole stream.
I can do that post audio, dude. I don't need to do it now.
Like where are all these questions I asked? I would have paid anything to be a fly on the wall to hear Rocco when it went offline and he's trying to get it back because Rocco does not verge from the cursing, so you'd hear
all he would say is
this
fiddlesticks.
Pumpkin smashing toothpicky. I'm mad. poopy face modem.
Yes, but everybody heard me. Or nobody actually heard me, but I was live, so I couldn't even say fiddlesticks, you know?
Fiddlesticks. I wonder
too
why the
far.
webcam was
Too
right
far, Rocco.
up.
But yeah, you're right. We go from still collects your information but doesn't sell it at least, so that's an advantage.
That's not
they
an
totally
advantage.
They totally do. It's a guarantee.
They said they don't,
But
and
we
I
won't.
believe them.
We won't get
They won't-
into
they
that
won't sell-
whole
they won't
argument
sell-
because I might switch to Apple over it. But it's not really that much better.
They won't sell you. They won't
You don't know
sell
how
your
many people-
data of your files, but they will sell your actual data of how many files you have, who you are, things like that.
You don't know how many people were sending private telegrams to me like, "Are you really mad about this?" I'm like, "Why does everyone think everything I say I'm mad about?" I'm just
Because you're very passionate.
oh, I was like, I'm not mad. Why would I be mad? And they're like, Rocco's joking in private. I'm like, yes, I know Rocco's joking. He's not getting an iPhone. I'm like, God, everybody thinks I'm this angry troll running around. I'll tell you guys a sad story. I played the trumpet in high school,
Let me get the violin out.
and I never got to first chair.
That's because
Wow.
they stand.
Well, now you tell me. Somebody tells me. This whole time I thought it was my skill. There was no first chair.
It's a trumpet, dude.
I played guitar for let's see, 4 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 4 days.
What bands invited you?
All of them. Yeah, Metallica had one. Was wanting me in there.
It's like, please, Michael, we've heard you've been playing for 4 whole days.
Exactly. It's like you must be like magnificent, masterful,
Trying to be more like Michael.
and naturally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of his, but yeah.
Sometimes Google don't. Well, actually, yeah, it's a good point. It was a while ago, but also sometimes Google doesn't send
I like the way you said it the first time. Sometime Google don't.
Shut up.
All right, I think the logos are right. The overlay's not going to be right, but that's nothing I can change.
Village Mountains. Oh yeah. Oh, there it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, how it's literally the exact same as it was last time. So what's different?
It hasn't been right. Remember, I said last week was.
Yeah, last time it's also exactly the same as the one before. Every one of the ones that worked perfectly, it's the exact same file.
It hasn't been right for probably 3-4 weeks.
And it's been the exact same file for the literally entire time I've made it.
I just telling you.
Someone
Stop
pops up.
breaking it. He's
Just so you
breaking
know,
Rocco's
Chris,
fault.
it's the
Rocco's
same
taking-
every week. Something pixels out.
Look,
And
the problem is the name tags on yours, Michael, yours and Zed are a pixel or two above the bottom of your video, so you can see the light go through.
Pixel or two. A pixel.
And if I raise it, then if I pull it down, then Chris's goes underneath where the writing gets cut off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, I'm throwing it out there. Maybe it would be awesome if we could have like an editable one that I could use, and then I could edit it to make it perfect.
Just an idea, guys. Maybe some of the time you use playing Rocket League together, you could get together and figure out the overlay.
Rocket League is life.
Yeah. How dare you?
I mean,
Imply that you could even replace anything. The only thing that replaces Rocket League is oxygen. Wait, I have to think about it.
all right, give me 5 minutes to see if this one will work right.
5 minutes of silence?
No,
I
just 5
Yeah.
minutes.
Because that's impossible for us. Could you imagine us trying to sit here for 5 minutes without talking?
It's never going to happen.
I can't even do it for 5 seconds.
Whatever.
I've got so much to say, Rocco, to the world.
You were close. That was 3.
Try harder.
It's not nice, Rocco.
Don't know. There is no try. Only do.
Mm-hmm. Do you must.
Oh, Yoda. Say.
Thank you, Michael. That works, actually.
Sweet.
Oh, wow.
You know what's
You
the best
actually-
part about that, Rocco?
Mm-hmm.
I moved it 4 pixels.
Everybody say something.
This is the part where we can talk.
All at once.
We can talk a lot.
Yeah.
But
And then
it
you can-
depends on how.
And we have to
like, what
overtalk
degree-
each other.
Yeah,
So
let's definitely overtalk everybody so nobody can hear nothing.
Yeah, definitely everyone just start talking right now.
Gosh, how many months have we been doing this?
Chris is like, why did I come on this show?
This is what you got yourself into, Chris.
Well, I sort of knew what I was getting into from Crystal.
Oh, I'm sure it was all good things that she said, right?
Believe it or not, somehow at the end of this, it will look like a professional production.
I wouldn't say
hard to imagine
professional,
now.
but
But it actually somehow does come out in the end after about 9 hours of editing, right now.
Ryan,
How close do I need to be to the microphone?
You need to be right onto the microphone.
You
to
need
where
to
your
be
face is pushing
eating it.
into the computer.
Michael, are you ready?
Yeah, he looks ready.
He's totally ready.
Always.
Hashtag YOLO.
I mean, how else were you going to get it? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe on the early ADSL you could have downloaded an ISO, but even then that'll be a day long download. So,
Yeah, I
What happened there, Michael?
Sounded like some bubble wrap.
my bad. That was not on purpose. So
Okay. All right.
Michael, are you literally sitting there with bubble wrap in the middle of a podcast?
That's why he has fidget spinners.
I dropped it. I dropped the fidget spinner. I dropped it.
All right.
you also got a chalkboard, and you're like,
I know.
"Oh, what? I'm just on the chalkboard."
Yeah, right. What's going on? I don't understand.
Don't be distracted or anything, Chris.
All right, we ready?
Yeah. Thank you guys for your continued support of the show and keeping this happening, helping us get brilliant guests like this on, and everyone who watches hits the thumbs up and supports this channel in any way possible. What does it
Smash
you say,
that like
Rocco?
button.
Smash that like button.
Don't say that.
Hang on, just do that like button, yeah.
Yeah, the like button down there.
Yeah. Don't do that.
I think that's going to be part of the outtakes. That's not.
You're
going
not supposed to tell him not to do it, Rocco.
Well,
I was
think
talking to you.
Yeah, I think Rocco is in
Now everyone's
prefer.
gonna be like, "Well, Rocco said thumbs down."
Well, Rocco doesn't really. He's not about the smashing. He's more about the ringing the bell. So be sure to ring the bell.
Ring the notification.
Whatever.
Yeah, just keep getting new ones after every cat destroys it.
Right?
I'm gonna put a high voltage headphone together and see what happens.
Hey, can we have proof that the cat's still alive, please?
Kitty. No, sorry. No, it's still around.
Just believe me. It's
Yeah. Yeah, just believe me.
But so before we go, absolutely, there's one question that we all have to ask, and Chris,
Really?
this is a very vital, important question. Marmite, thoughts?
I quite like it actually.
That's 3-1,
I don't have it.
I know. I've got to find somebody who hates Marmite.
What's the other one, Seb?
Bovril.
Bovril.
Throw up.
Throw up.
Do you know what? I haven't tried Bovril.
Then by not trying, we automatically assume it's terrible.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's the beef version of Marmite.
God, that sounds so disgusting. It's like chicken in a can or something.
Spam.
Yep. I think spam sounds better.
So seriously, what is the attraction to Marmite? Like, what is it that is like the reason somebody would even try that?
I think it's perhaps like the really sharp texture of it. I mean, I think it speaks to someone who might like mustards, particularly the English, like horseradish or wasabi. Someone who likes that will generally it's not obviously gospel, but they will generally also like Marmite because it's just got that kind of salty, sharp taste to it.
Yeah, it's more of a savoury thing, isn't it, than a sweet thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely savoury, yeah. And makes a good base for other things. You wouldn't necessarily have a Marmite sandwich of just like bread and Marmite, but you might put a small bit of Marmite and then something else, and together it has this sort of halo property of making stuff better. So yeah.
So I will get you guys. I'll ship it out to you. Okay, you can all have it.
I will take it. I will try it.
I actually do want to try it. Yeah.
How about you just buy some and take it to self and do it live and just taste it live?
Yes.
Could we find it in the United States?
Yeah, you can find it in one of the
I
international
thought it was
stores.
illegal because it.
It's actually it's a bit of a meme like food for the UK in terms of, sort of expat food. Like it's a classic, what would you miss if you had to live abroad? Almost to the point where, well, actually, when you go past, you can't take liquids past security at airports. But the other side of the security, you can actually buy Marmite, like next to like little travel shower gel things, like in the boots of the chemist. The other side.
So funny.
You get little like things of.
It's like a necessity. Like, oh gosh, thank goodness, on the other side, I can still get my Marmite fix.
Yeah.